After the incidents where Percy and Thomas scared each other, the two tank engines had decided to bury the hatchet and started pulling Halloween pranks on other engines instead. At first, Toby was fairly pleased that the two were finally not arguing over silly things like ghosts and dragons. However, that started to change as Thomas and Percy's tricks became more and more frequent. Making matters worse was that Toby himself was the most frequent victim of these pranks. One morning, Toby woke up to a horrific sight. When he looked at Thomas and Percy, he realized that both their faces were missing, and instead there were only smokebox doors.
Thomas? Percy? Can either of you hear me?
No response came at first, but then he heard ghostly whistling, and then all of a sudden, as the smokebox doors fell off to reveal Thomas and Percy's face, and both of them screaming with grotesque expressions.
Crikey!
Thomas and Percy laughed, and Toby just frowned.
So immature.
Come on, old boy. Some nice hard work will help you forget it,
replied his driver. But Toby didn't forget it. Later that day, he was at Knapford when a young girl came up to him. She had brownish red hair, grey eyes, and a height that suggested that she was a preteen. Toby immediately recognized the young girl as Lucy, his driver's daughter.
Hello, Daddy. How was work today?
Very well. Did you have a good day at school?
I sure did.
She then turned to Toby and noticed he was somewhat downcast.
Oh, hello, Toby. Is something bothering you?
It's Thomas and Percy's pranks during Halloween. I was glad when they were no longer ribbing each other about ghosts and dragons at first, but now I really wish they'd find someone else to pick on.
Oh, I'm sorry, Toby.
Just then, Hiro arrived with the passenger train. As Toby and Lucy looked, a younger girl and her mother climbed out of one of Hiro's coaches. The younger girl had long black hair with white dye on the ends, and was wearing a white dress.
Okay,
said the mother.
Now we'll just have to style your hair and you'll be the perfect Frankenstein's bride for the Halloween party.
That was honestly a nice costume,
said Lucy to Toby, who agreed.
You know,
mused Hiro,
that girl's costume reminds me of an Onryo.
An Onryo?
Oh no, an Onryo is a ghost from Japanese stories. An angry ghost who wants revenge on the people who tormented them in life, or humanity itself.
Hiro paused impressively.
But there is a story I heard about one Onryo that engines would be wise to look out for.
Oh?
Perhaps you'd like to hear it so you know when she arrives.
I don't see why not. I have an hour or so before I leave. What do you think, driver?
How long should your story take, Hiro?
Only about 5 minutes.
Go ahead.
When Hiro had finished, Toby chuckled.
Lucy, I have an idea for how we can pull our own prank on the tank engines.
He snickered as Lucy giggled and her father chuckled.
Good idea. I want to see how these two pranksters like their own medicine for a change.
When Toby returned home that evening, Thomas, Percy, and Daisy were all sharing ghost stories. Daisy was almost finished with her story.
And every year on the date of the...
Boring. Never heard that before.
What do you mean you've never heard it before, may I ask?
We figured it was like the stories we've heard before, with the part about the demon and the old engine, but ending it like that proves you are copying my story.
Before the argument could continue, Toby arrived.
Oh, stop it, you three. That story's only child's play compared to the ghost stories of the entire world I've heard in my time.
Oh, really?
Scoffed Daisy. But Thomas and Percy were intrigued.
Have you really heard that many ghost stories from around the world?
I'll admit, the entire world was an exaggeration. But one story that has always stood out to me was one Hiro told me from his homeland.
You mean Japan?
Toby looked at Percy, as if to nod yes, as he began his story. Around the turn of the century, a young girl named Aane Hitaka lived in a rural Japanese town. Her town, like many rural ones in Japan at the time, relied on the railway as its main link to the outside world, due to the underdeveloped road system. Every day, Aane and her friends would walk to school along the branch line that linked her town with the city of Yokohama. The line ran within the walking distance of the school, so they found it was the easiest way for them to remember where they were going. To avoid getting hit if a train came by, Aane and her friends would walk alongside the tracks rather than directly on them. This was more than a bit dangerous, but they figured it was worth it since the path along the railway was quicker than any that followed an actual road. Unfortunately though, this would prove to be a severe mistake for Aane. One day, Aane received a leaf green kimono as a gift. She loved it so much she decided to wear it to school the next day. When it was time to go, however, Aane walked on the tracks themselves because it had rained the night before, and she didn't want to get the kimono too dirty. Then, as the friends were nearing the school, Aane suddenly stopped after feeling a strange tug. The kimono had snagged onto a railway spike, and Aane couldn't move without possibly causing it to tear.
Don't worry,
She said to her friends.
It's 8:45, so the 8:30 passenger train has already passed, so I should be able to get it unsnagged myself without worrying. If I'm late and the teacher asks, just tell her what happened.
Akane's friends agreed to a plan, and Aane set to work trying to unsnag the kimono. Tragically, none of the girls had been aware that the 8:30 passenger train was running late. When Akane's body was found, it was a gruesome sight. Aane had her right foot and left arm severed off, and the rest of her body had been burnt by the cinders from the engine's firebox. Naturally, Aane was given a funeral, and a memorial was set up next to the tracks on which she died. However, that was not the end of the story at all. Many years later, a photographer came to photograph the engine involved in Akane's accident at the harbor, as part of a book about locomotives around the world. When the photo was developed, however, he noticed an unsettling sight in the background. The figure of a girl in a green kimono, with its bottom half stained in blood, seemingly no left arm, and her face black to the point that her features were impossible to make out. The next day, the photographer came to ask if anyone had seen the same figure, when suddenly a loud splash was heard. It turned out that the engine had suddenly moved by itself and fell into the sea where he drowned. An engine that witnessed the event claimed he saw a girl make the engine move by itself. But he wasn't taken seriously at the time. The drowned engine's crew were assigned to another engine, and nothing more seemed to happen. Then one day, while pulling a train through the countryside, the crew's new engine inexplicably ran dry and exploded, killing both crewmen. However, their deaths and their old engine were dismissed as coincidence. One day, though, it would all come together. A passenger train was running down a straight piece of track when, all of a sudden, it derailed out of the blue. No one was able to find an answer. That is, until a survivor mentioned peering out of the window and seeing a girl in a green kimono facing the train head-on seconds before the derailment. Then, an engine derailed, leaving a rail yard in Nagoya, and a worker claimed he saw the same figure too. Everyone knows the full truth nowadays. It seemed that the more disastrous an accident Aane causes, the wider across the world she can go. She's been seen all across the Far East, has been seen in India, Australia, and the Middle East, taking her anger out on the machines that she associated with her untimely death, and in turn, the people who operate them. Whether it's something as simple as a derailment or a fatal wreck, any sort of damage is all that's needed to extend her reign of terror. The worst part for us? She was allegedly spotted in Amsterdam last year, which means that Britain is almost certainly next. Percy and Daisy were both spooked and didn't say a word. Thomas, on the other hand, still wasn't convinced.
Ghosts are just in your imagination, and Japanese ones are no different.
I don't think you'll be saying that when you fall in the ocean,
replied Toby mysteriously.
Anyways, I've got to take a train's nap for tonight soon, so I'll see you all tomorrow.
Thomas decided to say no more, and went to sleep instead. As he slept, Percy could hear the sound of someone walking on the ballast near his cab. He thought nothing of it at first, assuming it to be the firelighter. But he quickly realized he was wrong when the sound became closer to his front. Percy opened his eyes and looked to his right side. Once he saw who was walking, he let out a yelp of terror and shut his eyes. Unfortunately, his yelp woke Thomas up.
Percy, something... Yikes!
Thomas tried to get a good look at who was walking in, and was also immediately petrified. Like Percy, Thomas had closed his eyes quickly. Nevertheless, both opened their eyes just as the figure exited their sheds. Upon a closer look, the two engines could see that the figure had long, black hair that became ratty from years of neglect. It wore what looked like a leaf green dress, which had been stained with blood. But what really scared Thomas and Percy was the way it walked, as if on only one foot, in a jerky, unhuman motion. All of a sudden, the figure turned to its right and started waddling in that direction and towards Daisy's shed. Thomas and Percy were only able to watch as the figure stood to the left of Daisy. They wanted to wake Daisy up too, but they were too afraid of what the figure might do if they said anything. The figure then raised its right arm as if trying to reach for the door of Daisy's cab. Instead of trying to get in though, the figure had other ideas. The figure instead moved its arm to the right, and Daisy started moving. At this point, the courage in the tank engines finally came to them.
Daisy?
Daisy quickly woke up, and her eyes soon wide open with terror as she realized she was moving.
Driver? What are you doing?
However, it became too clear to the railcar that her driver was not in the cab at all.
Anyone, please stop me!
Thomas and Percy could only stare, petrified as Daisy rolled out of the yards and onto the branch line. Daisy had no idea how long she seemed to run under her own power. All she knew is that she soon reached the junction at Nafford, when she could make out a deep-toned whistle. Up ahead was Henry, with a goods train for the mainland.
Look out!
The signalman on the night shift swiftly knew what was happening, and quickly set the points so Daisy finally derailed on some track points. Just as her wheels crunched on the gravel, Henry finally came to a complete stop.
What happened, Daisy?
I have no clue.
Stammered Daisy, still shaken by her near miss.
I honestly don't.
Back at the sheds at Farquhar, Thomas and Percy were still shaken at what they had just seen.
Thomas, do you think Daisy will be alright in the end?
I can't say for sure, but if I had to guess, we'd know if something did happen quickly. Just sleep some more.
Percy quietly agreed, and and both engines went nervously to sleep. That same sound of a person stepping on ballast woke Thomas and Percy up, and both stared at each other in silent terror. They then looked down, and realized it was their drivers.
Bad news, you two. Daisy became a runaway and derailed at a trap point near Knapford.
Thomas and Percy were both relieved that no harm had come about in the end, but were still nervous.
The Fat Controller wants you to come and explain what happened last night, to maybe find out why Daisy became a runaway.
Yes, sir.
When the two engines arrived there, Daisy was already being derailed, and had calmed down quite a bit.
Some workmen who were on the night shift say you two were awoken when you heard Daisy taking off. Did you maybe see what happened to make Daisy run away like that?
We saw some girl in a green blood-stained dress and...
It moved Daisy by force!
Everyone stared at Percy.
It's true. She never got into Daisy's cab. She only stretched out her arm and Daisy started moving as if the girl was moving something on a shelf.
What's all the commotion?
It was Toby, and on his footplate were his driver and Lucy, in a green kimono that was stained with what looked like blood. Thomas and Percy were not amused, to say the least.
You did this, you little brat!
What are you talking about? You're the one who made me run away last night. You're the one who nearly made me crash into Henry. Do you realize how many people could have died because of you? But I was asleep the whole night. Our prank on Thomas and Percy was supposed to happen during the day.
What prank?
Now he and Percy were even angrier. Toby and his driver sighed.
I'd been tired of all the pranks you two would pull on me around Halloween, so Lucy and I decided to come up with a prank of our own. The plan was that this morning when we got back to Farquhar, Lucy would dress up as that Aane ghost Hiro first told us about, and pretend to move one of you while one of your drivers controlled you by a thread tied to your regulator.
There was a rather long silence before the Fat Controller finally spoke up.
Well, Toby, I hope this will teach you to understand why certain pranks are considered acceptable on my railway, but not other pranks. That goes to you too, Thomas and Percy.
The Fat Controller then turned to Lucy and her father.
As for you, Mr. Warren, I'd like to make it clear that children are not allowed on railway property for a very strong reason.
But I never went anywhere on the railway last night.
It's true, sir. Lucy was still asleep at 1 a.m., and we planned our prank to happen in the morning.
Very well, then. Since it's your word, I'll keep the investigation open. But you lot just behave yourselves.
Yes, sir.
Throughout the rest of the day, the engines went about their routines, generally keeping to themselves. That is, until they were in the sheds again that night, when Toby was the first to speak up.
I'm sorry I tried pulling that trick on you. I didn't mean to cause any accidents or scare you that badly.
It's fine.
Besides, I personally think it would have been fair to pull a prank of your own after so long.
Just then, the yard manager came running up to the engines.
Hello? What's this?
James came off the line with a passenger train near Knapford. The entire first coach was crushed like an accordion, and we believe most of its occupants are dead.
All three of the Farquhar branch line engines went pale.
We need all hands on deck. So, Thomas and Percy are to collect some trucks to help clear the wreckage.
Do they know what caused this wreck?
One survivor says that moments before, he saw a figure of a girl standing on the track. The only thing he could see was the person apparently wearing a green and red kimono. Gordon said so too. He was waiting with the express and saw the wreck in the distance. Right?
Said Thomas's driver simply.
Let's get going.
Both engines went out to get the trucks to haul away the wreckage. No one bothered to say anything. They knew what had happened all too well. Tetsundo No Anke had finally reached Sodor.